In the early hours of May 25, 1996, a college freshman was walking back to her dorm. Her name was Kristin Smart. She was 19 years old. She had gone to a party near the campus of Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California. It was Memorial Day weekend. Students were out late. Music was playing. People were moving between houses, sidewalks, and dorm rooms. And Kristin was supposed to make it back to her room, but she never did. By sunrise, her bed was empty. Her things were still there. Her family would soon begin making calls. Then the calls became searches. The searches became posters. And the posters stayed up for years. For more than 2 decades, Kristin Smart was missing. There was no body, no confession, no final goodbye. But there was one name that never left the case: Paul Flores. He was a fellow student, and according to testimony later heard in court, he was the last person seen walking with Kristin that night. For 25 years, the case seemed frozen in time. Then, slowly, old evidence came back into focus. New witnesses came forward. A podcast brought national attention. Investigators searched again. And in 2022, a jury finally reached a verdict. Paul Flores was convicted of murdering Kristin Smart. But even after the conviction, one devastating question remains. Where is Kristin? Kristin Denise Smart was a freshman at California Polytechnic State University. Cal Poly sits in San Luis Obispo, a college town on California's central coast. It is surrounded by hills, quiet neighborhoods, and the kind of streets that can feel safe late at night. In 1996, Kristin was at the beginning of her adult life. She was tall, athletic, young, still figuring out who she wanted to become. To her family, she was not a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a 19-year-old with a future that should have stretched far beyond one spring night. That weekend was supposed to be ordinary. The school year was almost over. Students were celebrating. And like so many college freshmen, Kristin went out. She attended an off-campus party near Cal Poly. It was the kind of night that should have ended with a walk home, a dorm room door closing, a light turning off, a morning that looked like any other morning. But that is not what happened. Instead, one short walk became the center of a case that would haunt California for decades. On the night of May 24th, 1996, Kristin went to a party near campus. As the night moved into the early morning hours of May 25th, she left. At some point after the party, other students were helping her get back toward the dorms. The group did not stay together the entire way. One by one, people separated. And eventually, according to evidence later presented at trial, Kristin was last seen walking toward her dorm with Paul Flores. That detail became one of the most important facts in the case. A young woman was minutes away from where she was supposed to sleep. She was on a college campus. She was not in some remote place. She was not hundreds of miles from home. She was close. That is what makes the case so disturbing. The distance between safety and disappearance was almost nothing. A sidewalk, a few buildings, a short walk through the dark. Kristin never arrived at her dorm. She did not call her family. She did not show up for the life that was waiting for her. In the days that followed, her absence became impossible to explain. Her belongings were still there. Her friends and family had no real answers. And the campus began to understand that this was not just a missing student who had gone away for the weekend. Something had happened to Kristin Smart. The most haunting part of Kristin's case is what wasn't found. There was no clear crime scene that explained everything. No recovered body. No final location. No simple answer. There was only absence, an empty dorm room, a missing person report, a family waiting by the phone, and a college town suddenly filled with questions. Searches began. People looked across campus. They searched open areas. They searched hillsides. They looked for anything that could point to where Kristin had gone. But the search did not bring her home. Over time, Kristin's face became familiar across San Luis Obispo County. Posters appeared. Billboards went up. Her name became part of the landscape. But years passed. Then more years. The case did not disappear. It stayed alive because her family refused to let it fade away. Her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, kept pushing. They asked for answers. They spoke publicly. They kept Kristin's name in front of the world. And still, no one could tell them where their daughter was. In 2002, Kristin was declared legally dead. But that legal declaration did not bring closure. Because closure is not just a document. It is knowing. It is finding. It is being able to say goodbye. And Kristin's family still could not do that. For years, Paul Flores remained connected to the case in the public mind. He was the student last known to have been with Kristin. But suspicion is not the same as proof. And a name repeated for years is not the same as a conviction. The case needed evidence. It needed witnesses. It needed prosecutors who could take what had been gathered over decades and build something strong enough for a courtroom. For a long time, that did not happen. The case moved slowly. Sometimes it seemed almost still. But it never fully stopped. Investigators kept working. The Smart family kept pressing. And eventually, public attention returned in a major way. A podcast called Your Own Backyard, created by Chris Lambert, brought renewed attention to Kristin's disappearance. It did not replace law enforcement. It did not solve the case by itself. But it helped bring the story back into the public eye. It helped people listen again. And according to later reporting, it helped surface new information and witnesses. Then, in April 2021, nearly 25 years after Kristin disappeared, Paul Flores was charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged that Kristin was killed during the commission or attempted commission of rape. His father, Ruben Flores, was charged as an accessory after the fact. At that stage, both men were legally presumed innocent. The case moved toward trial. And in 2022, inside a Monterey County courtroom, prosecutors presented the story they believed had been hidden for decades. They argued that Paul Flores killed Kristin. They presented evidence and testimony about the last walk from the party. They also presented evidence connected to Ruben Flores' property, including what prosecutors described as a clandestine grave beneath a deck. But Kristin's remains were not recovered. That detail is important. The trial was not built around a body. It was built around years of evidence, witness testimony, forensic work, and the long shadow of one missing girl. On October 18, 2022, the jury reached its decision. Paul Flores was found guilty of first-degree murder. Ruben Flores was found not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. For Kristin's family, it was a moment they had waited more than 26 years to see. A courtroom finally said what they had believed for so long. Kristin had been murdered, and Paul Flores was responsible. In March 2023, Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. The case had finally reached a legal ending, but not a complete one. The biggest mystery is no longer who was convicted. A jury answered that. The bigger question now is where Kristin is. Her remains have never been found. That means the story still has a missing final chapter. Prosecutors said evidence suggested her body may have once been buried beneath the deck at Ruben Flores' home. But if Kristin had been there, she was no longer there when investigators searched. That leaves painful questions. Was she moved? When? By whom? And where was she taken? These are not small details. For a family, they are everything. Because justice in court can punish the person responsible, but it cannot replace the need to bring a loved one home. In 2026, authorities searched the home of Susan Flores, Paul Flores' mother, in Arroyo Grande. Officials said the search was part of the ongoing effort to locate Kristin's remains. Reports later stated that soil testing suggested possible evidence that human remains may have been present at the property. But officials did not recover Kristin's remains. And they didn't say the evidence proved she had been there. That is the careful line this case still lives on. There is a conviction, there is a sentence, there is a long record of investigation, but there is still no Kristin. No funeral with her body present. No final resting place. No answer to the question her family has asked since 1996. Where is she? Kristin Smart disappeared on a walk that should have been ordinary. A party ended. Students went home. The campus grew quiet. And somewhere between that party and her dorm, Kristin vanished from the life she was supposed to live. For years, her case looked like one more cold case that might never reach a courtroom. But her family did not let it disappear. Investigators kept returning to it. The public kept hearing her name. And finally, after more than 25 years, a jury convicted Paul Flores of murder. That matters. It matters because the truth took decades to reach the surface. It matters because Kristin wasn't forgotten. It matters because her family lived through year after year of silence and still kept fighting. But the ending is not complete. Kristin Smart has still not been brought home. Her room was left empty in 1996. Her family has waited since then. And even after the verdict, the sentence, and the failed appeals, the search continues. Some cases end with a conviction. Some end with a recovery. Kristin's case has one, but not the other. And that is why her story still feels unfinished. Because justice came late, but Kristin is still missing. And until she is found, the last chapter of her story remains unwritten.